it was more like to just try to share experience and our views over the programming field. So maybe instead of I introduce you, maybe you could introduce yourself and say, maybe tell everyone which is your position nowadays in front of Lincoln Center, and what exactly is Lincoln Center, what kind of shows you present there, and maybe also share a bit the path you cross from film criticism until programming.
Sure. My current position is as the Director of Programming at the Film Society of Lincoln Center, which is a film organization in New York City. Lincoln Center is a large performing arts complex on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and there are many different constituents: the opera, ballet, symphony. Juilliard School is part of it, and the Film Society is the film division of Lincoln Center. All the constituents of Lincoln Center work independently, although there are occasional collaborations. We have 3 cinemas that are open year-round, every day of the year, and we present a variety of festivals. The biggest one being the New York Film Festival, and probably the second biggest one being a program called New Directors, New Films, which we work on with MoMA, Museum of Modern Art. So we have 3 screens. On 2 screens at any given time we have a film in release. Usually it's a film that we programmed already in some capacity, but not always. And the other screen is our Cinematheque screen, our festival screen, which is a combination of festivals that we do ourselves or in partnership with other organizations. Some of them are like regional, national showcases, and we also do a pretty wide range of retrospective programs. So that's the Film Society of Lincoln Center. I actually brought programs for the last, I'm happy to just pass them around if people want to take a look at them. It might be helpful. These are programs for January through June of this year. Might give you a sense of the kinds of programs we do. And yeah, as Gustavo mentioned, I came to programming through being a writer. I guess I would say like maybe the first 15 years of my career was mainly criticism with a little bit of programming, and it's sort of like reverse now. I do mainly programming with just a little bit of writing as well. And I guess I've always seen the 2 activities as sort of just, mutually, like, they work together for me. I mean, like, one was an extension of the other always. Yeah, I don't know. My background in criticism was in various, many different kinds of publications, newspapers, magazines. I was the film editor of the Village Voice for some time, and then I wrote for the New York Times for several years. These days I mainly write for like journals like Art Forum and CinemaScope and places like that.
I kind of feel that there is a big quantity of critics moving to programming, no? Even if they are activities that combine and they are complement of each other in a way. If we look nowadays to the international scenario of film festivals, it's very, very easy to identify a lot of people who are putting more energy to write about films now in programming. No? Is there? Can you share with us your thoughts about that in a way that is this like a natural step to take sometimes, or is there like a current desire of people to not maybe to write, further think about films in this way, but to try to write film history in a different way once you're trying to define what people should be watching?
mean, I think there are a few different factors for this shift, I guess, or trend, or whatever you want to call it. Obviously, the most obvious thing is I think journalism it's never really been a very secure profession, and I think changes in the media landscape have contributed to that. I don't think anybody thinks there's the idea of thinking of like being a film critic as a career these days. I think is quite. It's a bit far-fetched. I don't think people expect. There are not that many jobs for film critics. But for me, it was more. I can only really speak for why I made the shift. I think for me there was an increasing sort of frustration of being a critic, especially working for places like the New York Times, where it's hard not to feel like you are kind of very much a tool, a part of the culture industry in a way that you have very little control over what you're writing about. You're writing about what is put in front of you, like any given week, whether whatever the studios, whatever a distributor wants to release, and it just felt like there was a more like tangible way to actually be engaged in film culture for me was to try to get films seen instead of writing. It can be quite difficult to convince an editor to write that something is worth covering. You wait for a long time for a film. You hear about a film, you see it at a festival, you wait forever for it to even show up. For the audience to be in a position to actually see it, and I thought being a critic is a much being a curator is much more tangible, much more immediate. You can actually make a difference in terms of putting films in front of people. So that was one reason I felt I had no interest really in for me the impulse behind criticism was always about discovery. And advocacy and trying to be engaged in film culture in that way. I wasn't really interested in like having opinions about films. I don't think it's I'm not really that interested in my opinion or in the opinion of others. And I think a lot of criticism these days, like you can see how reviews are aggregated into like point systems and like green tomatoes and red tomatoes and things like that, and like it just seems ultimately like not that engaging.
And I feel like once you move to programming, and it was when exactly it was in.
I had been doing a little bit of programming around, as a critic, I had worked with various institutions in New York, freelance basis. So I had been programming even since 2000, and the series I worked on with BAM, Cinematográfico, Brooklyn Academy of Music for about 7 or 8 years was specifically a series that was designed for films that didn't have distribution, were not going to be seen in New York. So it was always that impulse of like trying to fill in the gaps in the contemporary scene. But moving over to full time, I joined the New York Film Festival Selection Committee in 2009, I think, and then I've been working at Lincoln Center full time since 2013. And that's pretty much when I
And in between you were at MOMI also, no?
I was at, Museum of Moving Image, which I worked on their editorial materials for a while. And when the museum was being renovated, it's a moving image museum in Queens, in New York. And I started a few programs for them in like 2011, I think. So that was before Lincoln.
And I think it's interesting because New York has maybe the most privileged scenario for programming in the world, no? Because first, most of these institutions are wealthy, and second, or at least they have some structure for it, and second, they have like
wealthy is a bit too strong. Or maybe. We have budgets that they can sustain 3 screens of programming, but it's not. The funding structures are very different in the U.S. than they are in the rest of the world, I think, there's very, very little state funding. A lot of it is sponsorship and private donors. So it's a very different funding model, I think, than you would see elsewhere. But anyway, but yeah, New York is I think very robust these days in terms of cinema culture. I mean, you spend a lot of time there in the last few years, so you know it as well as I do. Maybe even better, since I know you were going to a lot of movies.
But I think it's impressive, like the archives they have, no? Like if you, because you can like propose programs, you can curate series based on these institutions' archives sometimes, no? And that's something very unique.
We don't have an archive. That's one, we're different in that regard. MoMA and Anthology, I guess, are the two major film organizations in New York City that have sizable archives, and those two institutions very often are able to put on great programs, drawing almost entirely on their own archives. But we don't have a collection, so we're. Our focus is therefore a little bit more on like festivals of new films.
But since you've been working there, you've been proposing a lot of series, no? Like it was like the partnership with Locarno, for example, where you show the retrospectives every year, but also like the Miami or the Fassbinder or others.
Yeah, no, I think it's been important because there was a time where I thought the institution had gotten away from sort of more like film historical programming and was more interested in just doing world cinema surveys, which were very important at a certain time in New York's film culture. But retrospectives are, I think, an essential part of any kind of cinematographic programming, and I think our programming is now about maybe 40, 60 like retrospective and new festivals of new films. We do have this partnership with the Locarno Film Festival where we present, not every single year, but Locarno does a major retrospective every year, and we will, most years, we'll present either the same retro or a version of it. The first one was George Cukor, and we showed like all 50 films that he made, which was like the first complete retrospective in New York. We've been doing Anna Magnani, as you pointed out. It's been important for us to show as much as we can in the original format on 35 millimeter, if there's a good quality print as well. And I feel like that matters to our audience, which is a pretty discerning cinephile audience. And I feel like to show something on DCP is not really such a draw for people who are serious about film in New York.
Well, living in New York for a while and trying to look to the international scenario of film festivals or cinematographs, you've been traveling a lot as a jury member, no? And for many festivals the past years, and had the chance to get to know a lot of festivals and how they work. I've been trying, yesterday we had a talk here and I was trying to describe a bit the profile of some festivals which were, in my opinion, the most interesting festivals nowadays in the world. So when you're not traveling as a jury, but when you can decide which festival you want to go to look for films to screen in New York, which festivals would you pick? Which are the festivals that a programmer should try to be?
Well, I think Cannes is unavoidable. It's like it's the biggest festival. They get the biggest names. They can pretty much pick whatever they want. So as challenging as Cannes can be for a working professional, it's a very difficult environment, I think, to be in. I think you kind of start there because like I think there's a lot of problems with the programming at Cannes. I think it sort of lacks a real vision to be honest. But I also feel like you can't, this is where you begin. This is where like the major filmmakers will show their work. But beyond that, I think I gravitate more to festivals that have a clear point of view in the programming, and I think certainly you see that in festivals like Locarno, and which I think is very, very good for emerging filmmakers. Filmmakers that might be considered too marginal at other festivals are often front and center there, and I think it's been a very important festival for the last few years. And I think other festivals, Rotterdam has fulfilled that role on occasion in the past, and certain sections of the Berlinale. I think the Forum does often have very strong work as well, and I appreciate Berlin as one of the only big festivals that has a real audience and that actually does feel engaged with its audience. I don't know, you go to a festival like Venice and it feels like a sort of a festival without an audience. It's a very strange experience to have because, there's no locals, it's not that many industry, so it's, I think, actually going to festivals you get a sense of whether some festivals are purely industry based, some are much more audience and friendly, I think. And I actually have to say, I really like, a festival like this. I haven't seen a film here yet. I will start today, but I think small festivals are great as sort of more building a sense of community. There's not an overabundance of choice. People tend to see the same films. Conversations are sort of more interesting, and you feel like there's a real energy to smaller festivals, which I like too.
And what about festivals which are more focused on a specific segment of cinema, as for example Film Marseille or CPH Talks or others?
I think those festivals have been pretty important in the past decade. These are all festivals that in some ways started as documentary festivals and have tried very hard, I think, to kind of expand and rethink the definition of documentary. And I think partly taking a cue from festivals like that, we started something in New York called Art of the Real 3 years ago, which was, I think, a little bit of an anomaly in the American documentary landscape, where we were much more interested in formally interesting approaches to nonfiction. That's a program that I think we've really spent a lot of time cultivating at Lincoln Center, and it's I think become one of our signature programs. You were there for, I think, the first edition. We showed a short film of yours, and I think it's been, it's a program that we're actually going to start touring. We're doing a version of it in Seoul, in South Korea, later this year. And it's been very important for us to show that there's a lot of talk in nonfiction about how this trend in hybridity and all that, but I think what we wanted to do with this program is also to show that these are not necessarily new phenomena, that nonfiction has been a very vital field since the beginning of cinema, and so we've always tried to show older titles, recently restored works. In our first edition we showed Anna, which you showed here yesterday, and if people haven't seen that, there's another opportunity to see it. It's a completely astonishing, I think it's one of the great documentaries, one of the great films ever made. I think festivals like FID, CPH, Docs, these are festivals that I think they're polemical festivals. They have a point of view. They want to start a conversation, and that to me is often more exciting than the festival that is just a bunch of films that could be the sort of something for everyone approach, I think, I understand why festivals do that, but that to me is like not the most exciting kind of programming.
Which is your perspective on Brazilian cinema? And I know that you've been programming a few filmmakers, but I feel there is still like a huge lack. No, like it's very difficult to figure what is Brazilian cinema. No, in a way, in the last like 2-3 decades.
Yeah, I mean it's a big question. I don't even know that I can answer that. You know, and for me, it's actually I feel like I don't know enough about it as somebody who this is my first time in Brazil. I see as much as I can, but I depend on people sending me films and people like you and among others. From the American exhibition point of view, I think it's a larger problem, which is like there's just really not an easy time for all foreign films, no matter, unless they're in French or something, where it's like it's just still relatively easy but I think it's quite difficult outside the festival context, especially for films to be released. I mean, I think Neon Bowl was released this year, the Gabriel Mascara film, which is I think one of the few Brazilian films to get a decent release with decent press and marketing behind it. We opened the film, we did a small retrospective of his work, but it's that's a rarity, I think. I think Neighboring Sounds did quite well a few years ago for a small film. But I think it's a larger problem that goes beyond Brazilian film. I think there's sort of a tentativeness among American distributors and even in some cases programmers. I think it's easy to show the known quantities. And I think for me at least, what seems to be exciting about Brazilian film now is that there's a lot of new voices, and I think that can be very difficult for an outsider to navigate. There just seems to be like a lot of people that you may not have heard of before, or like 1, 2, 3 films into their career, and I think that's exciting, but it's also challenging.
Who are these filmmakers that you will be interested to be watching their films in the years to come? Now coming from Brazil,
I think
apart from Mascaro and Clever that you just mentioned.
Putting me on the spot. No, go.
You presented recently, for example, shorts by Ana Vaz and João Torres, no?
Yeah.
Projections and directors.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people you're showing here. No, I mean, I think Ana Vaz is extremely talented and promising. But these are also and João Torres, who I think he has 2 films here. We just showed one of his shorts in Art of the Real. So there's definitely a lot. I think I do think that they actually are also they've been getting some traction. I think in the more experimental film world in North America. I think Honest Love especially have been playing quite extensively. I'm sure there are others.
Beck also.
Yeah, we showed his films too. His feature from last year.
Do you think that is it working well? No. Do you think Brazil, in terms of, because Brazil in a way it's very different from Latin America, no, which mostly Spanish speaking and Brazil Portuguese speaking. Do you feel it connected as a Latin, because it's very easy to sell these films in general when you present in places as the US, like the Latin American films, no? Like as Carlos did recently, this series, it was like membro scenes, no? Or
we did that
Latin
with
scenes,
we did that with Cinematográfico, which is an organization based in New York devoted to promoting like Latin American films. And I think Carlos's mandate has always been like, basically all of it, including, it's basically, all the Spanish-speaking countries plus Brazil. But the Film Society has always had a series, a long-running series from before I started, called Latin Beat, which was a survey of Latin America. I sort of stopped that when I started because it felt like it didn't have an identity. And so we started it again, working with Carlos, and it's a small series that we call Neighboring Scenes, kind of in tribute to neighboring sounds. And we did a first one this year, which actually did very well. It was a pretty wide-ranging, a lot of fairly commercial festival films with some sort of more sort of, I think, slightly more challenging work thrown in there. It did very well. So there definitely is an audience. There's an audience for, I think, when you show something in a festival context in New York. But getting a distributor to take a chance on it is another matter. I feel like it's a rarity, I think, often for films that are not. If it doesn't have like a big festival prize or something to be picked up by an American distributor, it's not a good time, I think, for exhibition. It's how do I deal with that? How do you deal with that?
You always blame the committee.
No. I don't know. I think I don't know. I think you have an obligation to be honest. You can be tactful. You can, I think most people understand you cannot show everything. I think there's people may express disappointment, but especially in the moment that you tell them no. But I think most people will understand the programmer's position, and
I think in Brazil there is a very particular scenario, or used to have a few years ago at least, that like filmmakers, critics, and programmers, they were all like the same group of people, no? And I think that's what turns very difficult to give sincere feedback.
Right.
Why? But I think you don't have much options, no? Like you first of all, I think you don't necessarily need to give feedback. No, it's not. I think it's you're being like nice to give some feedback, but you can't like reply each email if you receive like 2,000 submissions. No, you can't be that.
Yeah, I think you try to when it's somebody you have an existing relationship with, and if people really want to know, I feel like I try to do that. But I don't know. I mean, it's definitely one of the harder things of the job is like that. Having to say no. I think you say no more than you say yes, obviously. But this is, I think, one reason I'm lucky is that if I say no for one program, I can often put something in another program. It's like, sort of like a consolation for some people, and so it's it actually does help. This is one reason it's kind of good to have multiple things, multiple programs. Yeah, I feel like but you're right. I don't think you always need to say why. But if somebody's a friend, I feel like you're obliged to be somewhat forthcoming.
There's an expression in English that is very common, and as I work as a programmer, but I'm also a filmmaker and also a producer. It's very curious to hear that people usually say, "I'm not completely convinced by the film." Yeah?
That's a good one. I should use that.
Yeah, but I think like that's the line, no?
I'm not completely. Yeah. No, I mean, like It's a nice way to say no, right?
That's what I'm saying. What that means, no, that doesn't mean anything. But that's a common line, no, for programmers giving feedback for.
I think I've used it. I'm
No?
going to add it to that. Yeah, I mean, you just find a polite way